Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Thoughtful Bro. We are live streaming here on a mighty blaze today with the legendary speculative fiction author, Jeff Vandermeer. Jeff, welcome to the Thoughtful Bro.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And Neo, welcome as well.
And Neo, yes. Neo decided to be part of this show.
All right. So, folks, I'm Mark Cecil. I'm a writer, editor, and journalist, and I'm here, as always, for a wide-ranging discussion on the storytelling craft. We're here to talk about what makes writers tick, what makes stories tick, and with the right amount of thoughtful, the right amount of bro. Before we get started, just a few things. We're here on Tuesday to every single week. If you'd like to ask a question to Jeff, you can do that, and I will find out about it through my various means, and I will try to ask him. As for our upcoming schedule, next week, we're going to have a super interesting discussion with Suzanne Mettler and Robert Lieberman. They've written a book called The Four Threats, The Recurring Crises in American Democracy. So, speaking of what makes things tick, next week we're going to find out what makes America tick. But this week, right now, we're on with Jeff Vandermeer. And Jeff, I'm going to give a introduction, which I would say is brief, but I sort of just kept going because there's so much cool shit you've done.
You say, I thought you said BS.
All right.
Might also be true, but anyway, yeah.
All right, so here we go. So for those who may not know, Jeff Vandermeer is the New York Times bestselling author of the Southern Reach trilogy, which has been translated into over 35 languages. The first novel of the trilogy, Annihilation, won the Nebula Award and Shirley Jackson Award, and it was made into a critically and commercially successful movie starring Natalie Portman by Paramount in 2018. Other recent works by Jeff include Dead Astronauts, Born, and The Strange Bird. These novels set in the Born universe are in development with AMC. And in these works, as in all Jeff works, kind of from the beginning of his career, he's talking about the environment, animals, and our future. His career spanning 35 years includes being nominated for the World Fantasy Award 3 times and 15 times as a nominee. Sorry. He won it 3 times and was nominated 15 times. He's been called the Weird Thoreau by the New Yorker, and he's been compared to Edgar Allan Poe, David Lynch, H.P. Lovecraft, Franz Kafka, and countless other famous writers of the strange and surreal. So last month, which is why we're here today, Jeff published his very first foray into the YA world, which is a fantasy romp called A Peculiar Peril. It is a very, 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 very funny book, which is the first thing I would say. But it is also exuberant, fantastical, and the New York Times has called it a madcap magical mashup and a heck of a lot of fun. So a few final things I want you to know about Jeff before we get going. These are things that we're going to touch on in this interview today. For 11 years, he served as the co-director of Shared Worlds, which is a unique sci-fi fantasy writing camp located at Wofford College in South Carolina. He is known for his amazing book covers. Jeff's book cover game is super tight. I'm just going to show you some of the books that I own of Jeff's. These, I mean, like, this is just some of them, but like, Jeff's book covers are like works of art in their own right. Just look at that. That is just terrific. So anyway, we're going to talk about Jeff's book cover game, which is great. And then finally, Jeff's wife, Ann Vandermeer, she is a fiction editor with Tor, and for her work at Weird Tales, she won a Hugo Award. Together, Jeff and Ann have edited numerous speculative fiction works together, including the Big Book of Classic Fantasy, and the forthcoming Big Book of Modern Fantasy. And this makes the Vandermeers indisputably a power couple in the world of speculative fiction. Jeff, I'm done. Tell us about A Peculiar Peril.
Well, it has a fairly traditional setup. You know, some things I think of as innovations, some as renovations. And in this case, Jonathan Lamstead inherits his eccentric doctor grandfather's mansion, has been asked to catalog the Cabinet of Curiosities after the man's death, and he can't get his inheritance unless he does this. And he finds basically a door to an alt-Earth called Aurora, where this kind of brand of wild magic runs rampant. So you can't really predict how magic's going to kind of like show up or turn out. And the main thing he goes right into is Aleister Crowley rules a Franco-Germanic empire in this alt-Earth called Aurora, with the disembodied head of Napoleon still on a pedestal so he can be taller than everybody else as his military advisor. And it just kind of goes a little bonkers from there. So.
From there,
From there,
it's
yes.
strange. That is so awesome. So it sounds like you exercised a lot of restraint and, put your serious face on writing this book.
Right. Yes, exactly. Well, I just remember all the stories that I loved growing up, and a lot of them were fantasy misadventures. There was a quest, but there was also a high humor, component, and things didn't go right. And there was a lot of stuff about friendship and trust, but there was also, like I said, this mayhem going on and this wild sense of invention. And then if you look at like fairy tales, like we've had to look at for the big books of classic and modern fantasy, if you really look at some of those, like there's one called Hound's My Hedgehog, absolutely batshit. I mean, it is just, if you actually look what's going on, even though there's this internal logic. So I like the idea of a fantasy misadventure where the internal logic really hopefully works, but it is also over the top. So.
Yep. And that's exactly what it is, folks. This book is a riot. It's super funny. We're going to get into that in a second, but judging a book by its cover, Jeff. So for those of you who don't follow Jeff on Twitter, you need to start following him. If for no other reason than to see there's like an animation of this on his it's like a pinned tweet on the top of his feed. Just look at the crazy animation of this thing. It's beautiful as it is, but it like comes to life on his Twitter feed. So, what it reminded me of, Jeff, is Bosch, like the Garden of Earthly Delights. There's this kind of surreal hypernaturalism in it. But it's like, and I looked up Lindsay Carr is the artist, I think, and I looked Lindsay Carr. I looked her up online, and her other work is also totally.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, so Jeff, it is a kind of an old chestnut in among writers that, like, why do we have no control over our covers? Why did, like, the woman is looking that way when I said I wanted her looking this way, or whatever it may be. But you seem to always nail it on your covers. Can you just tell us, like, why are your covers so cool?
Well, there's a lot of talented people working on them, but then early on, my mom's an artist, and I have, like, I think inherited from her an artist's eye in the fiction, and then also have run my own publishing companies and been the art director. And so early on, when I started having books published by other people, other places, small presses, and then larger ones, I think the main thing is that I knew the language to speak to let them know that I would be of use, but not be in their way. And then I also have been fairly draconian about exercising the part of the contract where I have the right to override a cover. But honestly, especially since the Annihilation cover, I haven't really had to offer much feedback. And I think it's because since those covers in particular, every designer since and every artist has wanted to like one up that. And so Peculiar Apparel is a really good example because they were like, well, we want people to know that this has a lot of elements from Jeff's adult books, like, the talking animals, and there's a certain ecology element to that becomes even more clear in volume 2. But we also want it to be distinctly different. And so how do we do that? And I think this, and you mentioned Bosch, and that's perfect because there is a definite strain of absurdism and surrealism running through Bosch, and I think it's Arsene Baldo, I can't remember, the guy who painted all the stuff where it's like a bunch of fish that forms a face and a bunch of fruit that forms a face. And those are huge influences because a lot of art influences me. So I was so happy when I saw this because I was like, oh, my adult readers are going to know this has some of the same stuff they really love, but it's different enough that it's not like it's, so it definitely made sense to me. And there's a face in the background, definitely, that I didn't even see.
Wait, it's like, yeah, so. I see the face. I thought it was,
I didn't see that at first. I don't know why, but yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, tonally, this is just like, could any image capture like your signature tone more than this? I mean, it feels right on the money, And
then I got to work with Jeremy Zerfas, who I worked with on Wonder Book and some other things for the interior illustrations, which are just wonderful too, I think. So, and they really set the tone. I think all of this really helps for the reader to understand what it is they're entering and to enjoy it. I think it's such a huge amount of heavy lifting that's sometimes done by a book cover. So.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. So on to the tone and the humor. So Jeff didn't want to do a reading, so I'm going to do a reading. So
because 201 of social isolation.
So look, I just wanted to, like, these are like two totally rando parts of the book, but I just thought they like captured a lot about how funny this book is. So I'm just going to read two passages. One is from the table of contents. It's the table of contents for part 3 of the book.
Which is not normally known for being of riveting interest, but
right. But dude, you're killing it in every aspect of this book. All right, so here we go. Chapter 21, a rogue sister blister. Chapter 22, damn that speck. Chapter 23, if you don't jump, I push you hard. Chapter 24, bound to a madman by a giant worm. Chapter 25, flutter blood baby. Chapter 26.
Say that 3 times. I want you to say that 3 times fast.
Yeah. Flutter blood baby, flutter blood baby, flutter blood. We didn't rehearse that. Chapter 26, up a tree in the boonies west of nowhere. Chapter 27, my home is a giant war elephant. That I couldn't say 3 times because that's too funny. Chapter 28, flying deer and shadowy watchers. Chapter 29, please die on our fine selection of dragons. Chapter 30, comets and campfires. And chapter 31, I shall make your hand eat your face.
Which is was one of my favorite chapters to write, actually. But
oh, there's like so much there. There's like, I mean, there's like a literary aspect to it. There's like a playful aspect to it. There's a serious aspect to it. There's a haunting, eerie, scary aspect to it. It was awesome. And then just the one other thing I want to read, it's super short. So like at the end, the book is divided into like 2 books. And like at the end of book 1 and also at the end of book 2, there's a kind of like faux like book club questions. And there's these really funny like multiple choice questions. But I just want to read like the introduction, like the instructions to the book club questions. It's called the Wobble Book Club Questions. If you would like your results tabulated and considered as part of our general survey of reader satisfaction, please print out this questionnaire, fill it out, affix your name and hometown to it, crumple the paper into a ball, and curl the paper into a bottle, and toss it into a storm drain where we will receive it due to the power of magical drinking. So just always playful, funny. I felt like you just like you let out all the like whatever an organist does, and they let out every single thing, all the stops, and then everything else that they could let out. You just did it.
Well, I mean, in a way, Jonathan Lamstead as a character allows me to do that because he's kind of like the staid anchor of the book. I thought it would be actually kind of funny if the teen protagonist, although shy and perhaps younger than his age, is also more mature and not really in an angsty state. He's actually very reasonable, and there's situations they get into where he doesn't really panic because he's out in nature and that's what he knows. So that allows me to have the mayhem around him. If I didn't have that, then it would just kind of all go off into the ether. And then, the book club stuff I had fun with, but it also serves its practical purpose in that we decided to put the first 2 novels in one book. So it's like, how do you give readers a break and a palate cleanser? And one way I thought it was these book club questions. There's another one that I actually would like to read that's at the end of the book, if you'll indulge me.
That one is also hilarious, but go.
And this is in part because thematically I've been misunderstood at times, which is to say, I remember once I had a red rose in the lapel of a character's jacket because it changed from first to third person. That was the only way you'd recognize it's the same person. And a whole high school English class had to do a thing because the teacher said it was symbolic of the medieval rose. And then I came in and said it had nothing to do with that. And there was a revolt because it had already been tested on it. So anyway, so in the back of the book, this is one of the questions, the book club questions at the end. What is one of the major themes of book 2? A, marmots are people, humans are marmots. C, not helping your friends is the best way to live a long life. D, gravity works everywhere in the universes. E, being chased by monsters decreases the chances of romance. And F, love conquers all if by love you mean hedgehogs riding roosters, of which there are 5,000 in the book. So
that hedgehog roosters line was literally one of my biggest LOLs in the book.
So, as you can imagine, I had a lot of fun writing this, and I hope that actually comes through to the readers. I think sometimes when you have fun like that and you're loose, the readers appreciate that, and they kind of are willing to come along for the ride a little easier. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. And just one other question about this world. I'm like, what is it about like, these kind of Victorian-ish big mansions that like so lends itself to fantasy romps like this? Is it that there's just so much stuff in Victorian culture, or what? Or like the contraptions are kind of so interesting, but like also you can understand them sort of in a steampunk kind of way. I mean, just curious about it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that there's just a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, and what we don't realize is that there's so many emotional and other ties to objects. And this is something that I've explored before, but it really, it really can become part of the characterization. And so when I was thinking of a cabinet of curiosities, it just seemed like the perfect starting off point, especially because I also wanted to kind of like joke about those cabinets as well. So for example, Adam Mills actually came up with the concept, but let me use it, of a bear gun. So there's a gun in the mansion in the cabinet of curiosities. It's labeled a bear gun, but it actually shoots out live bears. So things are fairly wonky. And in a similar vein, although maybe even more pointed, in volume 2, when you see the academy that Jonathan goes to, there's going to be a lot of like subtle, or some maybe not so subtle subtext of commentary on not just real academies, but other fictional academies in fantasy fiction and schools and whatnot. So.
Totally. I mean, yeah, I mean, for those, it's like this book, it's sort of like an encyclopedia of like fantasy technique, fantasy world building, fantasy narrative style. There's like, I mean, like Jeff and I were discussing kind of ahead of the live broadcast that like, it's just, there's just so many things going on here, and you can kind of enjoy it on any level you want. If you want to enjoy it on like the pure romp level, adventure story, hero quest, you can do that. If you want to enjoy it on the kind of like, I am a like fantasy nerd and I have like read every fantasy book and I'm going to catch every illusion and I'm going to like worship in awe at like every single technique that is deployed here to such kind of humorous effect. I mean, you can do it either way.
Well, I mean, I think the thing too is that I have certain characters. Like I have this object, this artifact that Jonathan or Crowley are both trying to find, called the Golden Sphere. The catch is that it's actually intelligent, doesn't want to be caught, and it's actually got a lot of experience going through a lot of alt Earths at different time periods. So that allows me to make a lot of contemporary jokes because the Golden Sphere knows about things like pinball machines and other things. So there's a lot of like things I can do there that then also kind of set it off from some of the other more fantasy-based jokes. And then also, if you happen to be, this is really kind of deep, but deeply buried. But if you happen to be an aficionado and know a lot about the decadent and symbolist writers of the UK and France around 1900 or before, there are probably 20 or 30 in-jokes that on the surface are serving a totally different purpose, but you'll be laughing out loud if you know that little subset of literature that I happen to like quite a bit. But the key of the writer is you got to make sure that stuff's not showing, that you can enjoy it on the main level of the narrative, but then you can go back and find all this other stuff. And again, that's what I love about books, both as a kid and grown up. And even something like Thurber's 13 Clocks, which seems deceptively simple. It's something you read as a kid or a teenager and you get a lot out of it, and then you get more out of it when you go back. So.
Totally. I mean, I did get that feeling all along. Like, I know I wasn't catching every reference, but I felt this great sense of intentionality that like everything was there for a reason and everything was kind of like serving this double purpose in a lot of ways. One other thing before we move on from like how funny this book is, the Talking Head of Napoleon is like a big hit with like other reviewers. Like he ought to have like a breakout series. Like you got to give him his own show, Jeff. But the Talking Head of Napoleon is really funny. But I just want to say like the funniest part about it to me anyway, because I'm childish in this way, is that so Aleister Crowley is like the big villain of the book, and at one point he's sort of like reflecting on how annoying Napoleon is because he's so chatty, and then he's like, but he says like, this is why I don't mind having him around, is because since he doesn't have a body, he doesn't fart. And like I just got like, and I think you explained it, you can like fart by like ingesting too much magic gets you gassy or something.
Yeah. His Crowley's other mages, that's like a byproduct. And I've done this before. Like I wrote a Predator tie-in novel where one of the major sub themes was that the Predator, when he goes around to different worlds for his hunts, spreads all these invasive species because he's just not very hygienic. So I think it's I like getting the visceral across in different ways sometimes. There's another scene that I had a lot of fun writing, which is Crowley's war elephant is designed so there's an escape hatch underneath the tail of this mecha elephant. And there's a long discussion about whether it should be called a butthole or an escape hatch. And I just remember because one of the library reviews were like, highlights include a conversation about, I was just like, really? I thought you would try to like downplay that part.
See? I'm not the only
really
one.
A conversation about structural engineering, though, it takes.
Oh my God. All right, we're gonna move on. So I want to talk about world building. So like, as you know, you've been world building your whole life. This is just, you know, it's sort of like the holy grail if you're a speculative fiction writer, if you're writing sci-fi, fantasy, horror, you're trying to build a good world. And what's interesting is that you are the co-director of something called the Shared Worlds Camp, which is a camp for teenagers who write speculative fiction. And by the way, for those who might not know what speculative fiction is, it's just it's anything. It includes horror, fantasy, sci-fi. It's basically, it's what is not current mimetic fiction. There's fiction about our world today. Then there's historical fiction, fiction about our world in the past. Then everything else, in some sense, is speculative fiction. It's like things that are not our world and have a magical or kind of futuristic element to them, whatever it may be. So anyway, so Jeff, if I got that wrong, you tell me. But so Jeff Runn, he's a co-director at this camp. And the one thing that's so cool about this camp is that you get paired, the campers get paired with somebody who is like their world building coordinator who kind of helps them build their fictional world. So I guess, so first I want to hear you kind of about this camp, and then I have another question for you about it, but go ahead. Just tell us about the camp.
It's pretty unique. It came out of, it was founded by Jeremy Jones, this professor at Wofford College, who'd also done these workshops and classes for teens, where he found that talking about stuff in fantasy terms really helped across all kinds of subjects. And so he brought me in to be a co-director and co-founder, and now we've involved people like Nikki Power, this YA novelist, has kind of taken over my role, along with this other great person who actually went to camp at one point named Jackie Gitlin. So we've stepped back a little bit, but at base, what it is, you know, 60 students, and it used to be from all over the world, but obviously the last couple of years, it's just not, we haven't been encouraging international students for various reasons, but hopefully we'll get back to that. But anyway, so 60 students come in, and in, you know, groups of 10 the first week, they build their own fantasy world. They have a classroom teacher who helps them with that. And then they have guest writers who come in and give lectures, like Nnedi Okorafor has come in, Holly Black, N.K. Jemisin, on various aspects of world building, in addition to the classroom setting. And at the end of the week, they have a world that they can write in. And then the second week, they have to write a story in a week. And during that week, they have a professional guest writer embedded with their classroom to answer any questions, to, if they're comfortable, read part of their draft ahead of time. There's no pressure on them to show anything until they're done. But the great thing about this is that, you know, your average 13-year-old, you know, they want a personal stake in what they're writing, but what they personally write outside of camp may be too personal to share. But this is a happy medium where they've created something together, so it's not quite as personal, but they still have a stake in it. And it usually frees them up to write. It's almost like an experimental lab kind of situation. And they get the experience of writing a story in a week, which many of them have never completed a story or completed a story in a week. And then because of the world building aspect and the fact that we have gaming people, artists come in and whatnot, you know, you may also decide during the camp, you decide, I actually don't want to be a writer, and that's fine. You know, this camp promotes general creativity. So all the way around, it's worked out pretty amazing. And we have so many alumni who come back and they either have written novels, or they've gotten into gigs with Hollywood or something else, like they're an agent now, a literary agent. So I'm really, really proud of the camp, and really proud of how it's worked out.
So cool, man. That is just so very cool. And so I want to get into this world building thing for a minute, because I think that, like, you know, even if you don't write speculative, any novelist, and for that matter, any storyteller in any medium, has to set up worlds, right? Because it's like you have to establish what the normal world is for the character, and then like how does that change, and what are the rules of the new world, and how do you, I mean, if you're like Michael Lewis and you're writing a nonfiction book about like high frequency trading, you need to build that world. What is the world of high frequency traders like? And so on and so forth. Like any writer writing a romance novel, whatever it is, you have to do some aspect of world building. Clearly in speculative, it's really the name of the game because you're building an alternate reality. But I guess, so here's the thing. I'm not a teenager. I can't go to your camp. For those of us who can't go to your camp, can you tell us, give us the big 3 rules of world building that are helpful to people?
Well, I mean, one thing that I like about the camp is that we have so many guest writers with so many different points of view that there are no big 3 rules. It's whatever works for you, but the kids get to see sometimes contradictory views of what world building should be. And I think that's really important. My writing book, Wonder Book, is the same way. It has a lot of different voices, even with the through line of what I'm writing. For me personally, what I would say is that I always say that if you know your character, you'll know the world, because there's things the character will notice that, one character will notice that another won't. So for example, in Annihilation, the biologist is not really interested in the human world, so you get a lot of nature detail. In the second book, Authority, Control, the main character, has no interest in nature. So they're totally different textures to the book. They almost at times, I think, don't seem like they're written by the same guy. So that's one thing. The other thing is to know that there are constraints the world puts on everyone. We sometimes overvalue agency. So where you need to know your world beyond what the character sees is to know what constraints, what unexpected things the world may bring to the character or inflict on the character because of their situation. So those things are the types of things I think about almost across all novels. And then it just depends on how interior you are to character. Like on some novels like Hummingbird Salamander, this eco thriller I just finished, you're so interior that it's so important to know what the character will notice and what they won't notice as they're moving through the world. And then in A Peculiar Peril, the points of view are not always so tight in. And so there's more of the world kind of coming in that is from the character's point of view, but it's also detail from the author. So you always have to find your level on that too, I think.
I want to dig in deeper on that. We got a bunch of questions from the audience coming in, but one of them is about where you get your inspiration specifically for A Peculiar Peril. And I'm going to tie that into a question that I also want to ask you, following up on what you just said, which is that, to what extent, when you think of a new project, does the world come first, or the characters, or the message comes first? Like you have something you want to say, and it's almost, the world is merely a metaphorical way of getting across a message, or in almost an allegorical way, or is it like you start with the character and then build a world that's particularly going to have conflict for that particular kind of character? So we're just talking about inspiration and what comes first in the process of building out a whole novel.
Well, I think I've been very blessed in that theme is something that's very subconscious for me. And so I don't really think about theme. I think it's always there embedded very strongly. And so with regard to theme, after I finished a draft, if there are things that I think will enhance the theme, what I believe is the theme after reading, things that won't, then I will adjust accordingly. But I don't really think about it when writing a rough draft. And I don't start writing a draft until I have a few things in place in my head. One of them is a good idea of the main character, some kind of image or symbol associated with that character that's very, very, very bold. And then some idea of the ending, even if the ending changes by the time I get there. And if I don't have an idea of the ending before I start, I never finish the thing if I start to write it too soon. And lately, I do a lot more thinking than I do writing. And I think that might just be relaxing into knowing that I've written a novel that, as much as when I'm in the middle of one now, I'm still not sure if I'm going to finish it, I know I have. But I found that it really makes sense for me to do a lot more thinking ahead of time and really build up the complexity of relationships and whatnot. And then when I sit down to write, what's happening is the first few pages, I'm getting completely final draft because I need to get the tone and texture of what the character actually sounds like, especially if it's first person. Until I have that perfect, I can't continue. But once I do, it seems very easy to stay in that role. As for inspiration, my problem, for whatever reason, is too many ideas. So typically what happens is I'll finish a couple of novels that have been lingering for a long time. Usually it takes like 10 years from when I start thinking of something to when it actually gets written, for the most part. And then another cluster of like 6 or 7 novels will come to me, and I will feverishly write initial notes and stuff and set that aside. And then 2 or 3 of them over time will emerge as the winners, so to speak, that there was more there than just the notes. So it's more, I know that I reward my imagination by any idea that comes to me, any little thought, writing it down immediately. And if you keep doing that, you keep getting more and more of them. And it can be a little overwhelming, but at the same time, it's a lot better than the opposite.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
So tell me about, like, just walk me through like a recent moment. Like, say, you finished with a peculiar peril, and then you opened up an Excel file, a Word file, a notebook, and then you just like skimmed your top 10 ideas, and then you're like, that's the one.
No, it's more that I have a lot of notes on leaves about one particular project, because I was out hiking and didn't have any paper. So this particular time, as it turns out, I have a notebook that's just a bunch of leaves with notes on them, and then some bits of notebook from after that. And that novel is called Drone Love. And basically the idea I had, and I don't know where it came from, I guess I was reading something about drones, and then I was walking somewhere on an island that had a monastery-like feel to it. And I suddenly thought about, what if in the future there's an island in the middle of this sea of plastic and garbage, because that's all that's left of the ocean. And it's a reliquary. There are drones, but they're reliquaries. They're like closed off, non-Wi-Fi reliquaries for people who their minds are still preserved in there. And there's this weird culture around that.
Oh my God.
So that's where that came from. And then I thought, well, what if there's a detective who is actually not a detective? She's actually killed the detective who was coming to the island to do his thing and taken his identity. and that's the other thread. So now I have a character and I have a place, and then I had an ending at some point. I can't remember what that is exactly, but anyway, so I have the setup, I have all this, and then details accrete. So like I have another detail that I'm really in love with, which is biotech has developed to the point where there are these escaped biotech opera creatures that were created for opera. And so they're murderous now, but an aria comes out of them wherever they go, but they're so deadly that even if you hear the aria in advance, you're probably going to die. So I don't know where that came from, but that's the basis of the next novel that I'm working on. So it's just kind of like stuff comes together, and you trust your subconscious, and maybe it'll be a pile of crap. I don't know, but it's the thing I'm excited about right now.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing to me. And shame on me, by the way, that I didn't ask you or find out somehow that you have this notebook of leaves, and because I really want to see it. But
right. Well, anyway. I mean, it's more that sometimes I run out of paper while I'm hiking, and I tend to get a lot of ideas when I'm hiking, because I guess I'm in the moment. And so one thing you do learn is what kind of leaves to write on. Because the first couple of times I would pull fragments out of my pocket and have no idea what I wrote down. And of course, the other thing you learn is that you have to be careful about your handwriting, because I have pulled out a whole bunch of notes for one novel, and they were all frantically written during one time, and realized I can't write this because I have no idea what any of this says. So I write longhand a lot, just because there's no separation. I don't have to worry about opening my phone, which I don't actually even have. I don't have a phone, so. But anyway, that's the way I work usually. So okay. I know it's not like the ravings of a total deranged person, but
it's also on brand, though. It's also on brand in the deranged part of it. No, I'm just kidding.
It's amazing I'm even published. I mean, I still don't understand it.
All right. So I'm going to keep going. I do want to talk about the environment as my next topic, and that is a great segue. But I want to ask something first, because I feel like we're going to get cranking on the environment. But just real quick, for those who may not know, Jeff's wife, Ann Vandermeer, is an editor-at-tour, and as I mentioned at the beginning, she's won awards for her work. And Jeff, I'm wondering, there's a kind of, you get the full gamut talking to writers about their spouses, and many of them, you get everything from my wife or husband or partner is my number one reader. I'd never be anywhere without them. They're my best reader, my first reader, da, da, da. All the way to I would never show my partner any of my work. No way. Even from like very successful published people, it's just the relationship doesn't work that way. So I'm just curious, how does it work in the Vandermeer household when you are like collecting your leaves, typing them up? Does she look at the leave stage or?
No, not at the leaf stage. At the leaf stage, it's too early for anyone to look at it, except to maybe build a nest out of it. But but at a certain point when I'm writing, she is the only one that I can talk to when I'm in the middle of a rough draft. And she comes from a very different background from me. I've said this before, but I come from almost a subnuclear family, and she comes from a large extended family. The first time that one of her third cousins died and she was distraught, I didn't understand at all, because to me, a third cousin's like a space alien, you know? So that really makes a difference in terms of like character dynamic, you know, character history, you know, and it also explains why a lot of my early characters were loners. But you know, for writing something like Born, which is about family and about you know, parental role and everything, I would like, you know, in the middle of the novel, be like, there's something wrong with this scene. This is what the characters are doing. This is who they are. And she'd say something. Well, what if this character actually knows this character? Has known this character a long time. They're not just first meeting. This is somebody that they know, or they know, you know, and so that's the way it works out. And I've tried this with other people, and anyone else that I try it with, I get blocked and I never write the thing. So early on, I learned not to do that. But she is a collaborator at that level. And then also, I usually dedicate my novels to her. But because the dedication in Peculiar Peril was actually part of the novel, it's not. So Peculiar Perils actually got the first two lines crossed out on the dedication. For the children and for the birds are both crossed out, and then it says for the bird children. But usually that would be for Anne. And with Peculiar Peril, I wanted her to hopefully have the same experience of like rereading something that felt like something you'd read from childhood. Yeah. So this is the first book where she hadn't read it in rough draft. I wanted her to read it complete because it had all these parts.
When you did show it to you, is there like, what does it feel like? Are you nervous? Are you like,
we're both nervous. We're both nervous. Number one, I have to be somewhere else for her to read it because I get a little hovery. And then she's bracing for the interrogation because I have all these questions I want to ask. And then I'm also really want her to like it. And if she doesn't like it, I'm not going to be able, you know, I'm going to be very depressed for a while. Mm-hmm. So it's this weird dance that we do. And early on, there were times when she would have read it, like, and I would let a week go by, and I'd be like, "Well, what do you think?" She said, "Oh yeah, I read that a week ago." I'm like, "Why didn't you tell me?" And she's like, "Because I don't want the interrogation."
Yes. Oh, I know that feeling.
Sometimes, like I said, having her read parts of it during, or have me ask questions during, seems to work even better in some ways. But I was really thrilled. Like, she read Hummingbird Salamander just now, and I was like, "Do you have any comment?" She's like, "Nope, it's fine as is." I'm like, "Do you like it?" "Yep, it's great." I'm like, "Okay, great."
Oh my God. I think that would drive me crazy. I'd be like, "Don't you realize I have needs, emotional needs? Praise me."
Well, yeah. I mean, it was good to hear though. It's like, you know, yeah. That's the other thing is that, you know, as a critiquer myself sometimes too, it's like, you don't want to just make up crap. If something is ready to go, it's ready to go. You know?
Dude, so I did get, there's a lot of audience questions. I'm going to get to them, but one just came in that's pertinent to right now. Someone just asked, has Anne ever disliked some of your work?
Well, early on, she edited a magazine called The Silver Web, which was all about surrealism. And this was really kind of before we really met and before we started dating. And I was a very arrogant 19 or 20-year-old. And I sent her like the world's worst story, It was about a giant frog who steps into a magic closet and tries to go to the prom. I don't know why. It was just like literally the worst story. And she rejected it. And I wrote her back and I said, "Oh, I know the story is terrible. I was just testing whether you were a good editor or not." And Yeah, not really to my credit. Let's put it that way. And to this day, she will be at a dinner party or something, and if something comes up along these lines, she'll be like, "Tell them about the giant prom frog story, Jeff."
Well, now the world knows. All right.
No,
So,
I mean, clearly there's things she's liked more than others, I'm
yeah.
sure, but I'm trying to think. But yeah, so there's things
All
that
right.
obviously every reader relates to more than others. So.
Okay, so I do want to talk about the environment for a second. I want to bring it down or bring it up, whichever way it is, and just get a little bit kind of more serious. I know that, I mean, anybody who's read Jeff's work knows how important the environment is, like the consciousness of animals, the kind of slow apocalypse, as you've called it, like global warming. Jeff, this is not a secret, but Jeff lives in Tallahassee near the Gulf Coast, and certainly the Gulf oil spill was a very influential thing for you, and an inspiration on some level for the Southern Reach trilogy. I know this is something that could not be closer to your heart, and kind of I've heard you say in interviews that fiction is a laboratory to explore resistance, and you could probably say that about many different kinds of issues in our society, but certainly you feel that way about the environment. So just to cut right to it, there's some presidential debates coming up. I'm wondering if you could ask any question. Now, of course, I don't know if we'll get an answer, but imagine you could ask a question and get an answer. What would your question to the two candidates be about the environment and environmental policy?
Well, I wouldn't ask Trump anything because there's no point. Just absolutely no point. I've never seen anyone, and I know that there are parallels in other countries now, but who has destroyed more for fewer reasons other than just one, which is greed and kickbacks and corruption. So really, there's no point. On the other side, I'm not sure if there's a point either, in the sense that what we're trying to get back to is at least get back to the status quo before Trump, which Joe Biden will definitely bring. And then hopefully, like the House of Representatives and others who are farther to the left will push him farther left on the environment. I guess it's not so much that there's a question I would articulate as there are issues that I'm concerned about. And one of them is actually on the green tech side, because a lot of the green tech stuff we do is actually destructive to the environment. Whether it's, plowing over a forest to put in solar panels, to the fact that those solar panels will basically be oozing poison in 20 years into the soil, or the fact that even wind power is a problem because it kills so many birds. It's better than fossil fuels, but I'm continually struck by the fact that our imaginations are so bad within this kind of capitalist system that we can't get out of it. So you actually have some green tech people suing for lower environmental protections in the desert right now, which just seems totally bizarre to me. So I guess if I had a question, it would be a question that tried to get across the importance of the biodiversity and the wilderness, in the sense that if we get rid of it, we are going to kill ourselves as well as the things in it. And an understanding that just because something's solar power doesn't make it benign. And how can we get past that impasse, which is, I know, not what you're asking. It's just what's on my mind right now.
Yeah.
But I do think that if Joe Biden's elected, at least we'll have a rollback of all the horrible things happening on national parks. Hopefully we'll have more of social justice and environmental issues intertwined, which is very important. And I do believe the younger generation is putting out an extraordinary effort in this area. The number of emails and whatnot that I get from young people and people in their early 20s about their commitment to these issues and their understanding of them, much better understanding, I think, than a lot of people with a lot more quote unquote experience, does give me a lot of hope. So.
And Jeff, if you imagine that this is like a benign dictatorship, and it would, like, on January 2021, it's the Vandermeer administration and Emperor Vandermeer. And what would you, just give me one idea that you would have if you had absolute power right now to make a change to environmental policy? What step would you take?
Well, the one overriding one is not really answering your question, but I'll do that first, which is just simply to put back in the Obama era protections in every aspect of the environment. And then the other one, I don't know. It's very difficult because I think one thing that would really help is either better legal protections for animals, because that helps protect habitats, or actually doing what New Zealand has done and have legal protections for things like rivers, which sounds to a lot of people like it's like hippy dippy or something. And it really isn't. It's really about the public good. I mean, you hear about the public commons a lot, and that idea seems to have gone away a bit, but that's really all it's an extension of. And it's also a great extension and collaboration with indigenous ideas that, include land management practices that if we were using them, we'd be much better off in places like California with the wildfires. So there's a lot of, stuff out there, ideas out there that don't even come from the green tech sector that we really need to uplift and put into place. But it's a tough one to say what one thing. And I feel bad for the president hopefully coming in, because it really is going to be just a ton of work to untangle all this crap. So.
Yeah. All right, one last question on the environment, and then we're going to go to audience questions. And that is that, like, imagine it's 100 years in the future. Mm-hmm. And this is a real future, not an apocalyptic future. Mm-hmm. It's a future that you can draw a line from where we are at this moment today in reality to 100 years in the future. And imagine the best case scenario. Imagine that human beings, for whatever reason, have just decided to get serious, and they have figured out how to properly live, sustainably live, in harmony with the environment. But we've given up none of our technology. In fact, technology just has advanced at the pace we might imagine. Just give me an idea of like what a super highly advanced technological society like ours looks like when we're doing it right. Just give me just some thoughts or visions.
Well, whatever it is, it has to be non-extractive. And the fact of the matter is, it's not just the fossil fuel industry that's extractive. The solar panel industry is extractive, and so is the smartphone industry as well. So we look at these things as technological advances, but in actual fact, they're part of the same stuff that's from the past. So however this stuff occurs in the future, it has to be done differently. And, people laugh at things like biomimicry, mostly though, because no one's willing to fund it well enough, because there's not an initial burst of possible financial reward to it. But, the fact that they're looking into using fungus for wireless networks, for example, that they're biomechanical parts, things like that. If you can start, getting rid of harmful plastic with something else, or finding a plastic that, like mushrooms, is biodegradable. This all sounds like science fiction, but the fact of the matter is that our imaginations within this system have been absolutely stupid and terrible. And what's limiting us is an inability to get beyond the systems to do the things we need to do. So what I would simply say is that we would see a much more attention taken to not biodegrading the wilderness we have, whether it's prairie or forest or whatever, and using that as carbon sinks, and that we would be building in a way where our buildings are more integrated with the environment. And I don't just mean putting solar panels on top of them. I mean radically repurposing and reimagining even the materials we use to build with. So those would be some things.
Awesome, man. All right, so now we're gonna like totally skip around. I'm gonna try to get to like 3 or 4 quick questions here. So one of them is like a few people asked this, and you've answered this question before, I know, but there's just infinite curiosity around this topic. Your book was made into a massive blockbuster. So like, can you just give us any feedback you'd like about that? Like, did you enjoy the process? Did you hate it? Was it what you expected? Was it not? And so on.
Well, I mean, it's so hard for people to not like want to put your answer in like one category or the other, rather than it being this experience with a
thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, I don't know, but on the one hand, going through the process, even though I had so little control over any of it, allowed me to understand what the process is, because there's no real blueprint to it ahead of time. So like working on Born with AMC, I know where I can be of use. I know where I should step forward and where I shouldn't. I'm much more relaxed into it, and I have a much better idea of the things that I need to say are important to keep. Although also AMC has been like amazing, and that their vision for this is the same vision I have for it. Then there's also the fact that you have all these overlays. You have the overlay of the original place you wrote about, because it's really autobiographical. It's set in places that I know extremely well and love. And then you have the overlay of visiting the set. So you've seen it like half built. And then you have the overlay of seeing the rough cut, where not everything is in it. Like the music wasn't in for the two Natalie Portmans at the end. So if you can imagine, it was much longer. So if you can imagine that scene much longer with no music, it's really hard to process. And I might be wrong about this, but I swear that the bear wasn't voiced. Like it was just some guy going, "Help me." So it's hard. And then also I hadn't seen the movie when like people started reviewing parts of it. So like it was hilarious just from that aspect. Like there was somebody who reviewed it and only saw 10 minutes and thought it was about a world where all the men have disappeared and the women are going into Area X to find the men. So, you know, the whole thing. And then a bed and breakfast in England. The Annihilation did not, the crew did not tell them they were going to be putting skeletons and monoliths on the beach. So there was this weird exchange where they were like thinking that people have been killed and were just scattered on the beach for like half a day. So there was all this stuff that happened that, you know, I saw the movie perfectly only once, which was, I think, the fourth viewing that I had when I saw it on video at home. And it all clicked into place, and I really appreciated it. But every other viewing, it's like you've got all this other stuff in your head. So I'm an imperfect witness for it. But I am thankful because so many people, you know, then read the book too. So.
Of course, it was an awesome movie, and if you haven't seen it, go out and see it. I mean, most people who've read the book say they like the book more, but hey, who knows? Like this. But anyway, I love them both. All right, so here we go. Just a couple other questions. Oh, is there a collection of your early work ever coming
out? Like short fiction, I guess, or?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Well, there's a couple of things on the like Drawn and Quarterly this is kind of relevant. An earlier story of mine, Secret Life, is coming out from Drawn and Quarterly. It's a graphic novel by Theo Ellsworth. It's his interpretation of the story. I have still in print The Third Bear from Tachyon Publications. At some point, there will need to be a collected stories, probably. And then in the meantime, MCD FSG, my adult publisher, is in the process of reissuing all of my early work, including the Ambergris novels and Venice Underground. And then in terms of news stories, I have a collection called I can't remember what it's called, but anyway, which is all novellas about things like the subprime mortgage crisis, but from like a weird fiction perspective, which I know sounds really boring, but I promise you it's interesting. So.
Oh, I'm sure it is. I bet it is. So, all right, one last question from the audience. This is a Southern Reach question, and I'm going to try to like voice act the way that this is written in a mix of all caps and lowercase. What does the tower mean? What does it mean?
Well, I mean, having stepped into many of a class to find that the professor has assigned phallic tendencies to the lighthouse, which is always unfortunate. What does the tower mean? Well, I mean, what do you think it means? Here's my theory. My theory is that Authority is such a claustrophobic and paranoid book that by the time the reader gets to the third book, they don't believe a damn thing they find in it, because there's actually quite a bit of explanation and acceptance. But I have turned everybody into conspiracy theorists and wingnut paranoid junkies by the end of the second book. So what does the tower mean? What does anything mean these days?
Perfect. Okay. All right. Look, we got to wrap. I'm going to ask you one last question. This is my own question. I like to ask this at the end of my interviews. So let's just imagine for a second, back to A Peculiar Peril. We're going to hold up again because y'all need to buy it, bro. Yeah. So there you go. So first of all, do you imagine an ideal reader for a peculiar peril. Can you describe that person, or it just doesn't, you don't think of it that way?
It's so weird because it's always some version of me that I'm conjuring up as a reader while I'm writing it, at least. And then when you're editing it, you're thinking, how is this going to affect this reader or that reader? And I don't know, because I had first readers who were teens and adults, and they had similar reactions to the book. So I really do think it is for teens and adults, and it may just be a slightly different slant or whatever on it, but I can't think of a particular person. And actually, I just got an email the other day from a 67-year-old man who said it was the best thing he'd ever read in his entire life. And then I got an email from somebody who was 14 who was giggling over some of these jokes we were just talking about.
So I guess I'm more like a 14-year-old is the lesson of that.
There you go.
I'm more of a giggler. Okay, so regardless, whatever the answer to that question is, who's the ideal reader? I mean, maybe it's just all humanity, but just imagine that.
Wouldn't that be great?
The ideal reader is somebody who is having the ideal reaction to your book. Like they're getting every joke, everything that you imagined would be working is working. Just imagine they close the book and on the last page, and just describe for me like what feeling you want to leave them. What is the feeling they have after that read?
I think of this kind of cozy, warm sensation of having lived with some people and creatures that they really grew to love and did unexpected things. And even the head of Napoleon, I think you come to kind of at least not hate. But I don't know. I do feel like it's supposed to be a cozy, warm, you just close the book in front of the fireplace after having had a couple of marshmallows or something. And you have your hot cup of cocoa. Maybe dating myself a little bit here, but if the teens today still do that, I don't know. But
Yeah, no, my kids love hot chocolate. It's the same thing. Maybe they don't call it cocoa, but they love it.
That may be a Britishism. I can't remember, because I did grow up in a British Commonwealth country. So,
by the way, like one of the last images on the book is like it's Napoleon, because sort of ends with Napoleon's head, and he's thinking about how he needs moisturizer on his face to like keep his skin looking nice.
One of the biggest rules of world building is the detail that is the hardest to make the readers believe, say the least about. And that is Napoleon's head. How exactly does he get around? I don't know.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, folks, we're going to wrap with Jeff Vandermeer. Jeff, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. This was really a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
I laughed so much. This was great. This was awesome. All right, folks, just wrapping up for me on A Thoughtful Bro. We'll be back next Tuesday to talk about the recurring crises in American democracy with Suzanne Mettler and Robert Lieberman. Very apropos of the moment that we're in right now. It's going to be a great discussion, and we'll see you then. Jeff, thanks again.
Thanks.